Hello, everyone. It's Andrew here for Bowery Mick History. We're back doing stuff on Twitch, doing more stuff on Twitch. That's actually the first thing I'm going to talk about tonight. Is Bowery Mick History is taking another stab at making something out of this Twitch channel. So, in addition to this weekly, 30 or so minute just me talking into a camera. There's also going to be a new weekly video game stream on Saturday nights at 8. You can check the schedule here on the Twitch channel. And I will probably be putting stuff out about that on the social medias. Probably, if I remember. It's always a challenge. Fucking hate this fucking microphone. Anyway, Super J Skyline, low. anyway, what was I gonna say? A couple other things to cover before I get into what I actually wanted to talk about tonight. First, as of about 5-ish hours ago, maybe 4, new blog post came out on the Bowery Mick History website. Where did I put that link? There it is, first thing in the little notepad. And I'll just drop the link right there. Hopefully that'll work. But yes, definitely. Oh shit! All right. Did not realize that was your Twitch name. Awesome. What's up, man? Great to see you. Um, that made stuff is starting to make a bit more sense now. Anyway, so yeah, new blog post came out. It's about James Connolly, the American socialist movement, and how race plays into all of it, which was actually a really interesting blog post to research and to write, and hopefully y'all will think it's good. What else do I have? I think that was the big thing. Oh, one other thing. If you have literally nothing to do on Halloween, or you just like hearing me talk, there's going to be a special Halloween live stream on Monday the 31st. There's a whole thing I put together for it. There's a link to that. Basically, we're going to be playing the original, or I guess not the original, but Resident Evil 1. It's the, updated remake, not the original PlayStation 1 version. So the writing won't be as bad. But yeah, we're going to be playing Resident Evil 1, talking about horror in video games and the evolution of horror in entertainment media. It's something I'm looking forward to. I'm also looking forward to playing Resident Evil 1 for the very first time. I've never played it, ever. I've played 4 a number of times, because everyone's played 4 a number of times. Kind of like Assassin's Creed. But, it'll be... Hopefully it'll be a fun and interesting stream. And that link should take you to the little... I made a little Facebook event page for it. But definitely check it out. Mark it on your calendar. I haven't put it in the schedule yet on Twitch, but it will be there. So yeah. Anyway, moving on. I think that's all like the little housekeeping. Oh, one more thing. There will be a new podcast episode out. Hopefully Sunday, if I can record and edit it in time. It's going to be, for those who haven't been following who may not have been following the podcast, I've been doing a season of podcast episodes, all focused around one particular topic, and that topic has been, at least for this season, the American Airborne during World War II. And so the next episode is going to be something that's really interesting that a lot of people I know were probably expecting at one point eventually. On the American Airborne during the Battle of the Bulge. So I spent the past couple days, weeks actually, reading up on what every fucking paratrooper and glider trooper in the United States Army in Europe was doing uh, during the Battle of the Bulge and try to condense it down into something that actually made sense. But yeah, so yeah, that should be coming hopefully by Sunday, hopefully. Um, but yeah, that should take care of all the like little housekeeping things. Uh, no, I'll have you know there is not a lot of 17th Airborne. There's actually a lot of 82nd Airborne um, stuff. I kind of mildly glossed over the 101st because everyone kind of knows that story. Obviously, I didn't ignore them or what they did, but yeah, there was actually a lot more the 82nd because the 17th does it misses like the first half of the Battle of the Bulge. So for that first half, I'm really talking a lot about the 82nd and a little bit of the 101st. So, but then you also have all those littler detached airborne units that were being attached to different units all along the Allied line. It's a whole mess. But yeah, but yes, the 17th Airborne does make an appearance. um, so anyway, moving on to the actual stuff that I actually had planned for tonight. Um, First thing I want to talk about, hopefully, yes. So I don't know if anyone has been watching the news, but the women's national team for the Republic of Ireland made it into the Women's World Cup, uh, the Women's FIFA, Soccer World Cup. Um, Big deal. First time the women's national team ever made it into the World Cup. Huge deal. Everyone's excited. Um, However, it came with a bit of controversy. Apparently, shortly after winning their qualifying match, which I think they beat Scotland, uh, which was a very hard match to take a side in. Um, but yeah, the Irish team won, and shortly after, a video surfaced of them celebrating their victory in their locker room, singing a song called Celtic Symphony. Particularly the refrain, or part of the refrain, um, which was "Who Up the Ra," which is openly supports the Irish Republican Army, and the United Kingdom has lost its shit to the point where even members of Parliament are making speeches about it in Parliament as as the Tory government is falling apart as of this morning. Um, but it is kind of interesting that this is becoming such a big issue because everyone's saying, "Oh no, it's an offensive song. How dare you sing such offensive lyrics?" Which is kind of interesting because the song Celtic Symphony, um, I guess it's technically a rebel song. It's the least rebel song there is. It was written to celebrate the centennial of the forming of Celtic Football Club in Glasgow, which is the only soccer team in the entire Scottish Premier League that's actually worth watching. The rest just kind of eh. Um, and yeah, the ooh up the rah bit is kind of. I mean, that's the most radical that song ever gets. And give you some context, that song was written in the 1980s by Brian Warfield, who's a member of the Wolf Tones, one of the most famous Irish folk bands of at least the later half of the 20th century, at least like the last third of the 20th century. Actually, now that I think about it, they are kind of still competing with the Dubliners and the Clancy brothers, but still, they were one of the more radical Irish folk bands, and there are far worse songs that the Irish women's national team could have been singing to celebrate. Um, but the fact that the UK, or at least a lot of like conservative Brits, have been losing their shit over this, failing to realize that the history of Ireland is a history of rebellion against the UK, is kind of interesting from an outside perspective. I don't really think it's that offensive, or at least any more offensive than those, you know, groups like the Orange Order, who have very big, these giant celebrations every July to celebrate the Battle of the Boyne, which was this resulted in the oppression of Catholics and native-born Irish people in Ireland. So like there's a lot of oversimplification of a very complex socio-political issue that a lot of people in the UK don't really seem to understand, and they could very easily understand it if they took the time to understand, to like look at the history of Irish nationalism, Irish republicanism, and the Anglo-Irish conflict that has characterized over 800 years of Irish history. So yeah, I don't find it offensive. I don't think they offended anyone, really, except for, you know, unionist assholes who think the Union Jack is, a gift from God, which it isn't. It's a fucking butcher's apron. Anyway, but yeah, that's a little bit of contemporary controversy that can easily be connected to history and the study of history for you. Uh, yes, yes, Super J Skyline. It is based. Anyway, moving on to the big thing that I really wanted to talk about. This past week or so, has been the anniversary of the famous or infamous raid on Harper's Ferry carried out by John Brown in 1859, which one of the most important events in American history. Some would argue that it is the catalyst for the Americans, or one of the catalysts for the American Civil War. And so I just wanted to talk about John Brown and the Harper's Ferry raid, because it is very interesting, and it's a very important period in history, and it's very interesting how it has come to be remembered in the United States today. So for those who don't know, 1850, well, actually, kind of going back before the 1850s, this guy John Brown, he's a New England abolitionist, radical as they come. The man believed that he was an instrument in the hands of God to abolish slavery from the United States, possibly the world if he lived long enough. But at the very least, the United States. And he literally devotes his life to the destruction of slavery in the United States. And he does this first during Bleeding Kansas. He goes into Kansas when there's that whole big issue over, how is Kansas going to decide whether or not it's going to allow slavery or prohibit slavery, and it turns into this whole civil war before the Civil War starts. On Brown famously, with his sons, hacks a bunch of pro-slavery guys to death at a place called Pottawatomie Creek, and he becomes notorious for that. And then he goes back east, and he starts doing the rounds with all these like abolitionist groups, he does hang out with Frederick Douglass for a little bit, and Frederick Douglass, as you said, Super J, thought Brown was off his rocker. Thought he was crazy. Thought this was a crazy plan because Brown was going around trying to drum up support for a plan that he had to incite a revolt amongst the enslaved population of the South. And he was going to start with Virginia. And his plan was essentially to capture the federal arsenal in Harper's Ferry. At the time, it was part of Virginia. It's now part of West Virginia. There was a whole civil war about that. And his plan was to capture the arsenal, steal all the guns, and then go and inform and arm and equip and train an army of formerly enslaved people who have now taken freedom into their own hands. That was his plan. And he actually did get a fair bit of support from this, but no one wanted to actually join him. People were very happy to send him money for this plan, but everyone was like, okay, that's we're gonna keep our distance from this guy because he's a little nuts. They also, I mean, he also was talking about essentially open treason. Because he was raiding a federal arsenal, not an arsenal that was set up by the state of Virginia or by the town of Harper's Ferry. It was set up by the United States federal government. So that did raise some eyebrows. But carries out the raid. It goes poorly. Several of his men ended up dying in the process. The first person that was actually killed in the entire raid was actually a black man who was the postmaster of Harper's Ferry. I believe he was the postmaster. But yeah, it goes poorly. Robert E. Lee shows up with a detachment of United States Marines. They storm the little engine house where Brown and his cohort of raiders had sort of set up their like little last stand area. And on top of all of this, Brown the key part that Brown's plan hinged upon, the enslaved peoples of Virginia decide just like coming and joining him. That didn't happen. For a number of reasons. Maybe they didn't know that it was happening. They probably didn't trust Brown, which, that's a pretty decent reason. Or they didn't believe that it was going to work out and they weren't going to put their neck out for this crazy white man who's starting to shoot at Marines in Harper's Ferry. There's a whole lot of reasons why Brown's raid fails. It fails so spectacularly. And Brown is taken into custody, and he is tried by the state of Virginia. He is never actually charged by the federal government, even though he raided a federal arsenal. But the state of Virginia charges him with treason, because apparently you can commit treason against the state, which is a silly thing, but oh well. I'm pretty sure he was charged with several counts of murder. And the last one, and this is the big one, this is the one that got him hanged. He was charged with attempting to incite servile insurrection. Murder, even treason, in the state of Virginia at that time, if you were convicted, it did not carry a death sentence. It carried a very hefty prison sentence, but not a death sentence. But attempting to incite servile insurrection, that was what could get you a death sentence. And Brown, as we know, was famously hanged several months after the raid. There's a whole big period of time between when the raid finally ends, which is actually a couple days ago, and when Brown is finally hanged. And you have the whole trial in that process. You have Brown in prison the whole time. And what's interesting, really, is how news media is treating this whole subject. I actually did a paper on this when I was in college about how just New York newspapers treated Brown. There were some who were singing his praises, thought that this we should be seeing more of this. This is how we are going to actually end slavery. There were other newspapers that believed that John Brown was just the tip of a much larger abolitionist plot to destroy America, and called for guys like Seward, who went on to become Secretary of State under the Lincoln administration, to be hanged in connection to this plot, even though he wasn't connected at all. Like all these prominent politicians who were either moderate abolitionists, moderate anti-slavery, who had just voiced their opinion loud enough, ended up getting accused of being associated with Brown by newspapers. And then you had papers like the New York Times who were like, hey guys, maybe we shouldn't be pointing fingers at each other because then it's all going to turn into a whole big bloody civil war, and we really don't want that, which is ironic. In the end, though, Brown was hanged, and his body went a-moldering in the grave, as the song goes. Dude, imagine newspapers today calling for the death of politicians today. Crazy. Well, I'm sure there's probably some crazy little newspaper somewhere out in the middle of Kakalaki that is probably calling for some politician to die. Plenty of that stuff on social media, so things haven't changed that much. There's just more of it. But what's really interesting is after Brown is executed, he's hanged in the town of Charleston, Charleston, Virginia at the time. Today, Charleston, West Virginia. You can still visit the courthouse where he was tried, and you can still visit the spot where he was hanged. I have done so because my aunt lives in Charleston. I had to go down there a couple times. But it is a very interesting town. And at one point, there was a plaque on the Charleston courthouse that was commemorating. Basically, just said John Brown was tried and convicted of all of the charges. It listed all the charges and said he was hanged shortly thereafter. Blah blah blah. Very very general plaque stating very general information. And a couple of years ago, apparently the Daughters of the Confederacy, or the United Daughters of the Confederacy, one of those crazy neo-Confederate remembrance organizations that is, responsible for the constant perpetuation of the lost cause, paid to have that plaque removed and replaced with a plaque honoring residents of Charleston, West Virginia, who fought for the Confederacy during the Civil War. That plaque has since been removed and replaced with another plaque stating very general facts about John Brown being tried and convicted and hanged there. So I guess that's not exactly a win against the lost cause, but it certainly isn't a win for the lost cause, I guess. But what's really interesting is how Brown has come to be portrayed in popular media. Or not even popular media, popular memory. Even to this day, a lot of people in the United States think of John Brown as this crazy guy who did something crazy that no logical person ever would have done. And this guy who was a psychotic, fanatical terrorist. Literally, all he did was try to get enslaved people armed to fight for their freedom. I'm pretty sure there were several Union generals who did the same thing, or called it, or at least called to do the same thing during the Civil War, not long after John Brown was killed. And furthermore, like to this day, there are still people who talk about this stuff, who talk about John Brown as being this like crazy terrorist. But I personally am a fan of a particular opinion of John Brown. I'm gonna read a little. This quote came from a speech that was given in 1965. Listen to this. If a white man wants to be your ally, what does he think of John Brown? You know what John Brown did? He went to war. He was a white man who went to war against white people to help free slaves. He wasn't nonviolent. White people called John Brown a nut. Go read the history. Go read what all of them say about John Brown. They're trying to make it look like he was a nut, a fanatic. Okay. Later on in the speech, we have, where is it? Yeah. But they depict him in this image because he was willing to shed blood to free the slaves. And any white man who is ready and willing to shed blood for your freedom, in the sight of other whites, he's a nut. As long as he wants to come up with some nonviolent action, they go for that. If he's liberal, a nonviolent liberal, a love everybody liberal. But when it comes time to making the same kind of contribution same kind of contribution for your and my freedom, that was necessary for them to make for their own freedom, they back out of the situation. So when you want to know good white folks in history where black people are concerned, go read the history of John Brown. That was what I call a white liberal. But those other kind, they are questionable. So that speech was given by Malcolm X in 1965. And I actually let me drop a link to that. It was 64, sorry. It was July 5th, 1964. And I'll drop the link there so y'all can read the whole speech. Definitely worth a read. It's a great speech. Not as popularly well known as the Ballad or the Bullet, but still a pretty solid speech. And it's where we get this idea of, if you want to know if a white person is really racist, ask them about John Brown. But it's an interesting point. We do characterize, we as in the United States at large, have a tendency to characterize John Brown as this radical, fanatic, crazy guy. And all he really did was what ended up happening like 2 years after he was killed. He took up arms to end slavery. Slavery in the United States was ended as a result of the American Civil War, one of the bloodiest wars in American history. Over 700,000 Americans died as a result of that war. And the most important outcome of the American Civil War was the abolition of slavery. And so, because John Brown did it in 1859, we call him a crazy person. But because Ulysses S. Grant did it in 1865, we call that a hero. Very interesting. And granted, I don't mean like Grant single-handedly freed every enslaved person in America. I'm just pulling a random Union general out of a hat, and he was the first one that came to mind. But like, you get the point. Um, what else did I have? I guess the next thing is the random history thing uh, that I have at the end of every episode. And last time it had nothing to do with everything that was talked about in the episode. This time it has everything to do with what was talked about in this episode, and that is the pike. I stole this image. I will freely admit that. But this is a pike that was, you can find it, it's in the collections of I think the National Museum of American History. Let me drop the link to that so y'all have that. And basically this pike was part of several hundred that John Brown had acquired to basically arm enslaved people as part of his planned rebellion, because he anticipated not having enough rifles or enough guns stolen from Harper's Ferry to arm everyone who he expected to join his rebellion. So he had these pikes. He acquired these pikes to sort of make up the difference. And you'll see pikes like these in museums all around the United States. I'm pretty sure there's one of them in the visitor center museum at Gettysburg National Military Park, and there's probably another one in the museum at Harper's Ferry, and there's probably another one in another museum somewhere else. There's probably a few in the National Museum of the American Civil War in Harrisburg. So there were a lot of these, and I guess the fact that Brown had gone to all the trouble of acquiring, I think according to the description, this is one of around 900 or so pikes that he acquired for this rebellion. So he was getting these together in addition to the rifles that he had already acquired for his raid, in addition to the rifles that he was planning to steal as a result of his raid. So he was going to great lengths to arm this rebellion that ended up fizzling out in a engine house in Harper's Ferry. But yeah, there's also, I took a class on John Brown. That's where I ended up having to write that paper when I was in college, and we talked about the pikes. And there's also like this sort of what's it called? There's sort of a parallel you can draw between the use of pikes by John Brown and other rebellions, because we do see the use of pikes in a lot of like revolutionary imagery from the late 18th and early 19th century, which had to have influenced John Brown to some extent. I mean, the only one of the few instances that comes to mind immediately, for me at least, to tie it kind of back to the whole discussion of Irish nationalism earlier, was the use of pikes during the rebellion of 1798 in Ireland. It's a very important piece of imagery associated with that particular rebellion. So much so that it makes it into one of the most famous songs written about that rebellion, "Rising of the Moon." But the pike kind of became sort of this icon of revolution to some extent at the end of the 18th and into the beginning of the 19th century, and I think that at least partially inspired Brown in what he was doing. So yeah, I think that's all I got. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Thank you, Super J Skyline. for hanging out in the chat. It's great to have people in the chat. Um, as always, this will be up on Twitch for at least a week, and then I will be posting it on Facebook and YouTube as well, probably tomorrow. Check out the links in the chat, or if you're watching this on literally any other site other than Twitch, check out the links in the description, either below or above or wherever the fuck. And be sure to tune in Saturday. I don't know what game I'm going to be playing, but it will be something, and hopefully it will be entertaining. Hopefully. Anyway, until then, have a good night, everyone, and up the Ra.